Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Warcraft video. So, a while ago, one of my favorite YouTubers, Marquez, made a bunch of videos addressing the various tech companies, and they were actually pretty great. They were pretty constructive, and they were interesting. So today, I actually think it's a great idea to do that for Blizzard Entertainment. We're going to focus on what they can do, what would, for the most part, be solid improvements to this game without tearing the whole thing down and rebuilding it, i.e. stuff that's actually implementable for the most part. Kind of a low-hanging fruit, the stuff that can be done. So, let's kick it off with something a little bit more fun. Tintable armor rewards. Okay, so visual progression is super important, and it's not because of oh, look at me, look how pretty I am. It's not because of that at all. It's because having something that looks cool that was also challenging to acquire is extremely motivating. Just look at the gear of Vanilla and TBC and how that's remembered, or more recently, look at the Legion Mage Tower and those tints and how cool they are. Well, for the current game, I think it's really quite bad at providing long-term engaging visual rewards. You have things like the Heritage Armor questlines come in for, the Silver Moon boys, and, you get a full set with 30 minutes of questing. That's not a lot of gameplay for that much art resources, and frankly, the armor is of very little value and respect because of how common and easy it is to get. What I would do is I would advocate for an armor and tint system. You would start off by having one set of armor for each armor type. This set would be designed to allow for tinting, just like Legion's artifact weapons. Now, these tints would be unlocked by doing a wide variety of game content. Again, just look at how the Legion tints, but were done, but just more numerous. Now, these sets, the more the merrier. Perhaps you could have a core set, and then have variants of that core set that would cater to different preferences like shoulder size, helm design, just the shape of lines, things like that. And the strength is that by having these be a natural base set that is designed for tinting, it would allow for mixing and matching with other armor sets, and that would make for a wonderful complement to the game's existing transmogrification system. Doing this right would fill a major hole in what I'm going to call the emotional progression of the game. What you feel. People don't feel that much about item level anymore, and I think for decent reason. People generally want to, work towards a specific goal, something like a Mage Tower skin. That feels great, and I think a system like this could be part of the solution to really the lack of that feeling that the game seems to have. Next up, PvP currency. So, look, it is clear to me that too many of these is a problem, but I think we can easily find a happy middle ground between where we were and where we are now. So here's the simple version that slots into the game as we find it right now, and we're just going to call it Titan Forging V2. In this system, you could still have an item Titan Forge, but that Titan Forge would be capped at plus 10 over the base item level. Now, if a bit of gear does not Titan Forge, then don't worry, you can manually Titan Forge it by going through the Titan Forge and using a currency. This currency would be paced quite slowly, but no matter what, you would always be capped to plus 10 item levels over an item's base. And that means that getting a Titan Forge drop would essentially just be getting a free 1 out of 2 or 2 out of 2 upgrade. Overall, this would be a little bit more slower paced, it would have a bit more player control, and I suspect it would be a lot more palatable to the Blizzard Entertainment that we find ourselves with today. Capping things to plus 10 also has a number of great side effects. It means that, say, base heroic loot is always going to be better than Titan Forge normal loot, but it means that people who are running normals can regularly get item level upgrades by re-clearing content in a way that does not have their normal mode Titan Forge loot compete with the item levels of base heroic loot. This preserves the value of item levels and the attachment of those item levels to content and to difficulty, and it does not further increase item level bloat for the next raid tier, like larger amounts of Titan Forging can, or how, Ian expressed in his recent Q&A when he outlined his position against upgrades broadly. Now, that's a solid middle ground. Alternatively, you could bring back a gear vendor like patch 5.2. Might not be a bad idea, actually, but I think a bit of an issue is that just Blizzard's gearing system doesn't work with that right now. When you can be given a free item level 400 from a Warfront, it kind of does undermine traditional reward schemes like currency. So maybe that weird Titan Forging Plus is like the best we could do right now, though eventually I would like to move to a more traditional system as the bread and butter. Next up, economy first professions. So right now professions are very economically inefficient. They are designed so that kind of an individual player can, always be sort of doing something with their profession. They're kind of very small scale, and they often require a lot of bind-on pickup resources. This, I think, has resulted in a system that does not exploit basically the labor done in the game, and that results in players having a high price for goods and services. For example, title cores. Everything that requires them is more expensive than it needs to be because those players who are interested in producing goods as their main form of gameplay can't, because the title cores are bind on pickup. Now, if you think about this economically, well, all of those dungeon runs, they are labor that we are actually getting very little value from most people. So really following from that example, I would advocate for economy first profession designs, at least insofar as the commodity goods are concerned. I think this would allow for just those of the auction house to get a lot more out of it, but more importantly, it would mean that players who, as an example, do a dungeon, well, they would actually then have a sellable resource with a bind on equip title core. And this could really help people pay the bills, and I think this would be a lot better than the current situation where really a lot of resources in the WoW economy kind of go unused. Now, Blizzard have talked about how they don't really design the economy, they kind of design the professions in a very traditional game design-y sort of manner. But the thing is, with World of Warcraft, it's actually a very vibrant economy with millions of participants. So I think they need to think about that. Oh, and also a revamped auction house. I know you guys are working on it. The sooner the better. Next up, actual world events. Why do we still have no good world events in, current year? I mean, let's just start with the Destiny 2 public events. Before you click off, trust me, they're actually quite smartly done. So they last a few minutes, they typically are about enemies pressuring an objective, and that forces you to play pretty aggressively. However, if you're totally smashing through them, then each Destiny 2 public event has a triggerable heroic mode that is a harder difficulty with greater rewards. Now, look, take that. Make that work for WoW mechanically, and just put it in the zones. And there you go, the world is a hell of a lot better. The more of these, the merrier, especially if they're able to increase them in scale and really make them feel like it's a big MMO event, potentially being a lot more dynamic and challenging versions of the Legion invasions that we saw with the Legion pre-patch, which at least were a cool proof of concept that they never followed up on. But the thing is, you could go really so much further. You could have these things maybe affect the status of hubs in-game. You could maybe let them trigger each other. So as an example, if you knock out event 1, that will maybe cause event 2 or 3 to spawn. You tie all these into a theme, and suddenly you have a system that really makes it feel like there's a lot more going on in the zones. Now, let's even go mad. Let's throw some affixes on them. Some weekly affixes for the public events to sort of spice them up. Basically, my point here is more stuff that kind of spawns in and out actually dynamically, that has variable difficulty modes, that just takes place in the open world, so that it's not just, it's more than just world quests, and there's actually some dynamicism, ideally, to it. Next up, smart enemies. So almost all WoW enemies just feel like a hitbox with some health, at least out in the open world, and even those that do have mechanics just kind of run towards you and start doing their mechanics, and it's kind of boring. Now, think about if those enemies were in any other type of game. It just would not cut it. Now, look, low-intensity mobs that are designed to just be carved through en masse, probably they're a good thing for the pace of the game, but I would like it if they added in more special rare world enemies that use the game's new island enemy UI. As an example, the boss of an enemy camp is active. You could maybe have roaming enemies in zones. This could provide a sense of threat. It could make zones feel a lot more dynamic, maybe even providing some kind of unique rewards for players who really are up for a fight. And it could really make the zones themselves feel unique and different. I mean, you could almost have it feel like this sort of souped up version of the mercenary system from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, having, little nemesis enemy characters who will try to hunt you down. Of course, you'd have to make it all work with World of Warcraft, but it could be something that could bring, well, game design back to the enemies that we fight on a daily basis, and not just to those that are in raids and dungeons. And really, their new AI has so much potential, especially with loads of the other things that I'm going to be mentioning in this video, like those public events. Have those public events combined with smart AI enemies, and I think you could really start to have something pretty special in your hands. Next up, unique reputations. Oh, reps, it's kinda sad. They've all been normalized into the World Quest system, and that just makes them all feel the same. In Battle for Azeroth, there may as well only be one rep, because they all feel the same, and that did not used to be the case. Sketis felt different to Netherwing, which felt different to Sporagar, which felt different to Shattered Sun Offensive. Argent Tournament felt very different to Wormrest, which felt very different to Oracles and Grizzlemaw. Even a Mists of Pandaria, well, all those reps felt very different, especially, say, the Dragon Rider faction compared to the other ones. Right now, though, there is almost no room for the game designers at Blizzard to design the fantasy of the game's reputations. They all have to fit into the World Quest and Emissary system, even if, some of the quests are, some whimsical turtle punting or something. So Blizzard need to rethink reps. They absolutely can be a cornerstone of the world content experience. They can feel like distinct things with uniquely designed gameplay experiences, yet Blizzard have not attempted to do that since 2013. Even take the Kirin Tor. It's still just world quests. Why not have a quest line where you start as an initiate in their order and you unlock things as you progress through the rep, new content to do, new mechanics, do things like that, so that, they can create an actual progression through gameplay feel, rather than just watching a bar. I think that would be really important. Next up, differentiating mounts. And this is one of the more out there things in this video, because mounts are just boring now. There's so many of them. Just a new skin's not that exciting, especially in a world where, say, Guild Wars 2 has mounts with unique traversal mechanics that are actually mechanically kind of cool. So for World of Warcraft, I think that having mount customization slots would be a pretty decent idea depending on the mount type. Now, perhaps this could be really simple. Just have some slots in your mount window. You could put in some, enchanted horseshoes that allow for water walking, and maybe you could, put all the existing profession upgrades in there. Then have some basic abilities like a sprint or a charge. I mean, hell, why not have a special gnome-engineered springed stirrup that lets you heroic leap off your mount into combat? I mean, as long as it's not active and instanced content, there's no balance problem here. And, you could have basic slots for all mounts, but why not throw in mount-type specific abilities? Give dragons a breath. Let it do AoE damage. Is that perfectly balanced? No, it's not, but it's just messing around in the world. If all mounts being perfectly balanced means that none of them are interesting, there's basically zero advantages across the board, then that's boring, and I want unbalanced mounts that feel different. Let horses have a back kick stun, give boars a charge, why not give hippos a bite, why not have the elementals actually do something elemental? I mean, that is all a little bit wacky and far out there from where we are right now, but I think that the potential of having mounts be fun again is worth it. And I mean, Blizzard, like legit, if you guys want to make more WoW token money, make your mounts more interesting. People will do that conversion. And really, I think this would be fun because it would also allow for more varied rewards. And importantly, it could let you better realize the fantasy of riding a dragon, or, having a champion horse that's really speedy, or being a big savage running around in a coked up hippo. All those things could be done with mounts, but right now mounts are just purely a visual thing. I actually do think some mechanics that are a little bit crazy, some of them even a little bit OP in some scenarios, are fine and fun as long as they're contained to the open world, and just let the world of Warcraft be that big MMO playground. Why not? And next, difficult single-player content. Yeah, the lack of this is really showing, and it's mostly because players had over a year of the Mage Tower, being used to that. And I think it really is worth Blizzard considering this as a core gameplay pillar of World of Warcraft. Now, a BFA launch version of this could look something like this. So, you have, say, fights, right? But they're fights with champions of the enemy faction. You get X attempts per week, but it's all framed as being an SI7 mission to take out important members of the Horde. Now, this would have added new gameplay-focused dimension to the war campaign, and it would have provided content for times just like the pre-dazar'alor period where the game was in a bit of a lull. Next up, treasures and rares. Rares first, I think they should add another tier of rare that actually is a lot more rare and allow for a lot more room in their design. And, there's things like, say, players triggering them, through stuff in the world. Blizzard have experimented with that even in BFA, and I think it would be great to see more of that stuff. And then design-wise, I think broadly with rares, I'd like to see them be designed as kind of like 45 to 60 second encounters that have properly challenging mechanics that would have to be executed well, or else you die. die. Almost like miniature Brawlers Guild, sort of rare bosses, but actually in the world. Then as for the treasures, just go back to the WoD model baseline and, we'll see what happens after that. Next up, creative asides. I think we need more things like Chromie, like the Withered scenario of the treasure room from patch 5.2. Fun, creative asides that are just something different, something new. Take Warfronts. To be real with you, I'd rather Warfronts were solo, or maybe 5 players, and they would give you maybe a pseudo Warcraft 3 experience, where you had a lot more control. I'd much rather a Warfront that was a small, fun little side activity designed for gameplay first, rather than just another weekly loot delivery system with player engagement in mind that sacrifices all gameplay and fantasy to fit the broadest possible audience. A move that, often just leaves it having no audience that it appeals to. Next up, zone abilities. Let's have zone mechanics. Tanan Jungle had this nice thing where you would get a damage dealt and taken buff whenever you would stand in the goop, and this added a bit of risk and reward into what was otherwise a pretty damn boring zone. Now, you also had things like, say, the Nagrand gliders in Warlords, but, more fully embraced. Things like this would really allow Blizzard to express the fantasy of their zones through the gameplay, having the world matter mechanically, not just in terms of what happens, if it happens to have a world quest or not, would be great. So maybe you could have elemental storms, weather effects, strange void tears, and these could all be things which would essentially act as affixes on a zone. Then, within zones, having some more baseline mechanics. I really feel like they just throw the zones to their level designers and their artists, and they create beautiful work, and then they populate it with content, but I feel like there's rarely unique mechanical designs to set the zones apart, and that seems to be a big area for improvement. So yeah, there you go. I think that for the most part, to be honest with you, this stuff's low-hanging fruit. I really do think it is that, and actually Nazjatar seems to be doing some of it, which is kind of exciting. But it's just about, beefing out the experience, making it feel like more than just a weekly set of random incentives that players are going to target for maximum efficiency, because at the end of the day, that's how Blizzard designed the game to essentially be played in a non-punishing manner because of how they've done their catch-ups. I think these things just could bring some more of the life, just some uniqueness, some texture to the world, because right now, I think my biggest overriding criticism with World of Warcraft is just the game systems feel very overt and non-RPG, and I think things like the zones that you go into mattering mechanically, just a game where, say, even with a reputation, where there's a lot more room for a designer to, much like how a designer might get really passionate about, say, the Chromie scenario or the Withered scenario, a designer at Blizzard could get really passionate about the structure of a reputation and its quests and its progression and its storyline and actually be able to create that fantasy in-game. And right now, they just don't have the ability to do that because everything's been put into this big live service-esque feeling, or in the modern sense of the word, sort of pre-planned content delivery thing that I think to a lot of the people who play WoW, because it's an RPG, an MMORPG of course, it just doesn't really feel like it's in alignment with the emotional reason why they play the game. So there you go. That is my thoughts on some low-hanging fruit, some easy ways to improve World of Warcraft. Okay, a few of them are not easy, but I think a lot of them are. I mean, yeah, if we were doing the whole thing again, I would make a different video, but this video is all about what could be done in like 2 years to, steer the ship, not to, rewind time and, I don't know, set a different course, I suppose. So, thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know what things you would like to see down below, and with that, I will see you next time.